episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Okay. So as a little background, the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health was established here in Philadelphia back in 2017 by Thomas Jefferson University and Jefferson Health, and a large multi-million-dollar grant from the Marcus Foundation, headed by its chairman, Bernie Marcus, who's also the co-founder of the Home Depot, to ultimately expand the research, education, and clinical care profile of Jefferson's integrative medicine program and to set the international standard of excellence in evidence-based, patient-centered integrative care. The Institute features a novel curriculum focusing on clinical applications of integrative medicine with an emphasis on functional biochemistry, nutrient-based therapies, mind-body neuroscience, novel mechanisms of healing, and a variety of emerging therapies. We're honored today to be joined by Dr. Dr Monti, who is the founding director and CEO of the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at Jefferson Health. He's also a professor and founding chair of the historic first ever Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Thomas Jefferson University. Dr. Monti received his MD degree from State University of New York, Buffalo School of Medicine. He did his postdoc work in the Research Scholars Program in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior at Jefferson Medical College. And he works closely with his colleagues at the Institute and departments to constantly expand, refine, and define the integrative medicine approach at Jefferson, including a variety of innovative clinical programs, cutting-edge medical education, world-class research. Dr. Monti has dozens of journal publications, international presentations, media appearances. And when he's not doing all of that, he is quite an accomplished author with a variety of books, including Integrative Psychiatry and Brain Health, together with Dr. Andrew Weil, The Great Life Makeover, Weight, Mood, and Sex, and his newest book, The Tapestry of Health, Weaving Wellness into Your Life Through the New Science of Integrative Medicine, which was co-written with Dr. Anthony Bazan, also at Jefferson, was just released in August 2020. Let me say, Dr. Monti, thank you for taking the time to come on the show today.
What a pleasure to be with you today, Ira.
It's a real pleasure here. Typically we start things off by handing the guest the floor just for a little bit to talk about themselves. If you could just take us back a little bit, sort of introduce who you are, where you grew up, and a little bit of your journey, how you developed an interest in science and medicine and psychiatric medicine, and then ultimately, what put you on this path to create this new journey in integrative medicine here at Jefferson?
Great, thank you. Well, as you mentioned, I went to medical school at the State University of New York at Buffalo, and that's where I grew up, in that town. And it shaped a lot of my early thinking and direction in life. I always knew that when I was very little, I wanted to be a veterinarian, and then when I got a little older, I wanted to be a doctor. I always knew that. And so I was thrilled to go to the medical school at the University of Buffalo. That's where I had always wanted to go. And when I was in medical school, I had two experiences that really shaped the direction of my career. Probably, we'll say three. One was I realized that I had an acumen and love of research. And the University of Buffalo had a research track. And I was able to sort of do an independent research project. And I liked things that were neurological or mind-body. And in that one, it was working with children with spina bifida. But all of my clinical trials are either something in the neurological realm or in the mind-body realm. And also, natural molecules is something that we've been working on a lot as well. We actually have a COVID study that I'll tell you about in a minute. But, back to that time in medical school. So there was research, and then from studying a lot, I would get this kind of wrenching pain in the back of my neck, and I tried a lot of different things, both conventional and not. And I decided to go to an acupuncturist, and it was this little Chinese man who barely spoke English, who had this, office with egg timers on the outside of them as he kind of ran from room to room, putting in a couple of needles. And I thought to myself, this is probably just a big waste of time, but we'll see, because I was pretty left brain scientifically, thinking as I have that part of me. And he puts the needles in, he talks to me for a minute, and I leave, and I don't think much of it, and I don't notice that much. But I'm home studying that night, and I feel the back of my neck unwinding, like it never had before, just from this one treatment. And I was like, wow, this did something. I don't understand why it did it, but it did something. I would say the other experience also in medical school is I was working in a research lab at the Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo. And I was fortunate enough to have this grant to work in a lab and understand some of the basic science that they were doing. And some of the techs, were talking. And I was feeling a little bit run down just from studying and everything else. And they're like, well, are you paying attention to your diet and nutrition? And I'm like, diet and nutrition? And so what does that have to do with anything? And they actually went to this holistic nutritionist. And I said, I'll go with you one day. And this person was just so good. And really, the things that we still talk about, some of the things that we've discovered in our clinical trials were things that she was advocating way back then. And so this was, the 90s. It was, a long time back, yet it was so life-changing for me to start paying attention to my own diet and nutrition. And I realized when I was in medical school, what they taught us about diet and nutrition was a 2-week module on nutritional deficiencies. So you have so little vitamin C, you have scurvy, or so little vitamin D, you have rickets. But what about a healthful amount of those nutrients? What does that do for you? And of course, vitamin C and vitamin D are things we think about in the current pandemic. And I have a clinical trial on the vitamin C. But back then it was just not taught about. And when we learned about glycemic control, and I remember the professor saying something like, well, you use a lot of sugar if you say, run a race, which is why, some people might eat a candy bar right before the race. And I raised my hand, I said, but if you eat that candy bar, what if you got a reactive hypoglycemic response and that impaired your ability to run the race well? And he said, I don't really know what you're talking about, and moved on. And so I realized that there was this gap when it came to nutrition. That's why, you mentioned our department, which is part of the Marcus Institute, but also part of the medical school, which makes it kind of a historic first. So it's the Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences. And it was really our dean and provost who said to me, when you name that department, put the word nutrition in there somewhere, because no one else in medicine does it as well as you guys, so you should own it. And that was really this terrific thing about him and the leadership at Jefferson. And so nutrition and nutritional sciences are an important part of what we do, probably because it was an important part of my life, and it set the direction of some of the research that I did then once I got done with my training and so on. So for the past 15 years, I've been developing this experiment of integrative medicine at Jefferson with a wonderful team and a terrific leadership at Jefferson, and started off as this little part-time center when I kind of took the helm in 2005, and we're now 2 large centers under the umbrella of an institute, a department, lots of clinical trials, lots of academic programs, several physicians. And so I'll end with, you mentioned the most recent book, Tapestry of Health. We wrote that book, and it has Marcus Institute right on the front cover, because we wanted it to be a celebration of everything that we've accomplished at Jefferson in integrative medicine. My president and CEO of Jefferson, Dr. Klasko, wrote the introduction. Sure. We acknowledged our donors, because we wanted to tell people about where is the science of wellness and integrative health? What can people be doing? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? What is the cutting edge studies? What are they showing? What are things that we're working on? And what do we tell our patients? If you don't live in Philadelphia, what kind of guidance do we give? And so that's why we wrote this one, Tapestry of Health, and we're really sort of happy to have it be a Marcus Institute book, not just a Dan Monti book.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Just as a side note, I do remember scurvy and rickets and learning about that, but the one that always stood out to me was beriberi, your vitamin B1 deficiency. And anyhow, getting back to something more serious.
And that's what we learned, right?
Exactly. When one looks at a definition of integrative medicine, and I've cobbled one together from the internet here, sort of, a healing-oriented form of medicine, takes into account the whole person, studying factors that influence health, wellness, and disease, including all aspects of lifestyle, including body, mind, spirit, and community. One has this beautiful definition of, as you were pointing out with the acupuncture and nutrition and so forth, that sort of existed for technically thousands of years. Yet when we come into the 20th century, and I come out of the pharmaceutical, sort of the old school pharmaceutical industry, most of the 20th century saw this very reductionist, silver bullet approach, trying to get rid of nature, even though the majority of all pharmaceutical products originally came from nature. Now we're seeing a bit of a resurgence with these concepts like systems biology and understanding. And hey, I'm a system. I'm not just this receptor or that enzyme. Talk a little bit just in general about what integrative medicine is to you, and sort of a little bit of the history of how we're sort of seeing this resurgence of interest in this integrated concept.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head, because there's been this huge disconnect. And there were a lot of forces that caused the disconnect, and now we have to reconnect because we see what the consequences of that disconnect are. We, arguably live in the nation with the best medicine in the world. We have people come from all over the world to learn our surgical techniques, to learn how to use our devices, to even have access to some of the pharmaceuticals, as you were talking about. But we clearly do not have the best health status in the world. We don't make the top 10 list for healthy life expectancy for men or women. And even when you tease out confounders like access to care, you still have a big gap between our healthfulness, our wellness, our healthy life expectancy, and the fact that we have all of this great medical science. And it's because for a lot of different reasons, people have become disconnected between what they do and their health. Health is all about, well, if I develop a disease, it's this passive process. I go to the doctor gives me something, and that addresses the disease. And so it's a very disease-focused model versus a health-focused model. I think what integrative medicine does, and part of my job at Jefferson has been to try to define it, and because everybody defines things so differently, and then it makes people run from the definition and try to come up with a new word, and then a new word, and then a new word. But essentially, we're trying to bring back the health component and the wellness component to medicine, because what my colleagues in primary care do is a tremendous service. We're not saying that we want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's just that it's not a complete enough picture. They're putting out fires. They're having to see 7 people in an hour. So they're running, from room to room. Okay, you have a raging strep throat. Here's your antibiotic. Next, you have, I think I might need to send you to the hospital. Next, all of the preventive medicine, all of the, how do you maximize your wellness status? How do you improve your actual health status from where you are now to what it can be? That gets lost in that model because there's no time for it. There's no reward for it, and there's not actually a consciousness for it on both sides of the equation, the medical profession and people. And so part of what we're trying to do is not just educate other clinicians with our educational programs, but also the population, because the disconnect has happened on both sides of the equation.
When I go into your sort of long series of publications, I see a fascinating range of sort of intellectual pursuits. You're studying things like amino acids in neural conditions like Parkinsons and multiple sclerosis. You're doing work in calorie restriction and the inflammation involved with chemotherapy, art therapy in breast cancer patients. Really neat spread of stuff. Obviously, you've published quite a bit. Take us through a few of these obviously they're all interesting, but the ones that are most interesting to you, if you can just maybe take us one to nutrition and some of the
Yeah.
things related to maybe inflammation and inflammaging, just to give a smattering of different types of studies that you've been involved in so far.
Well, as you started out saying, we're a system, but we're a network. We're a network of systems within systems within systems. And so it's always interesting to me when something emerges as a place to access that network where you can make a substantive change in the person. And so in terms of inflammation, that's a common mechanism that we look at across a lot of our clinical trials, because inflammation is a process in the body that fuels a lot of the other problems that people have. In fact, it fuels almost every disease process there is. And there's inflammation that we have some control over, and then there's inflammation we have less control over. And if we just think about inflammation for a moment and some of the places that we can control it, it'll then make sense as to some of the directions that we went with the research. One source of inflammation that there could be some control over is actually stress. And we live in this huge time of stress right now. And what do we mean by stress? There's always going to be some stress, but we talk about stress in terms of the nervous system in a very biological sense. So for people who ever took a biology course, you might recall there's these two branches of the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, or to make it simpler, the fight or flight response when there's some sort of a threat to our well-being that we perceive in the environment, or the restoration and recuperation part of the nervous system, which resets things, lowers the inflammation, allows the body to heal, and those kinds of things. Like when we're able to have restful sleep, when we meditate, when we connect to our creative selves, when we connect to those we love, those things help reset the nervous system. When we breathe, things that many people are forgetting to do because they're so in fight or flight mode right now. And that fight or flight mode has survivalistic purposes. If you think back to, days of, being in the jungle and you see a lion in the distance, you want the nervous system to activate itself without you thinking about it, and it does. And so you go into that fight or flight mode. If you're smart, you choose flight. Go up a tree, the lion passes, the nervous system resets itself, and then it's supposed to, kind of go on in a more balanced way. But the lions of yesterday have been replaced by a pandemic today, uncertainty about work and income, concerns about an aging parent or grandparent amidst everything going on, homeschooling your kids, and so on and so on and so on, so that there's never a break from that fight or flight response, which means inflammation in the system is always high. And when we're in fight or flight mode, what happens? We become hypervigilant, so we don't sleep well. And when you don't sleep well, then that causes even more inflammation. The blood pools away from the gut into the periphery so that you can fight or flee. And so digestion isn't good. And so the nutritional status doesn't work out to be as optimal as possible, and so on. It has this continuous spiraling effect because we're a network, and the network is communicating with the different systems of the network, and so on. So finding ways to break that fight or flight response is something that we studied. So we study it with mindfulness-based meditation. We've had several clinical trials on that where we show that the brain actually changes. We did some clinical trials, as you mentioned, with cancer patients, because if their inflammation is high, that affects everything in terms of long-term outcomes. So we want to be able to de-stress these people as much as possible. We did two types of studies. One, you mentioned the mindfulness-based art therapy, where we combined artistic expression along with the mindfulness training, and that had a big impact on, this was a breast cancer study, on women who were breast cancer survivors. Their brain changed, many of their health outcome indices changed. This because when you change stress levels, you're going to change the entire person. Then we did a study using the neuroemotional technique, which is something I helped in the development of, and that's for people who've had a more pinpoint traumatic event, as many cancer survivors do. This again was a cancer survivor, sometimes it's the moment of diagnosis where you think, this is it, it's over, what's going to happen to my kids, and it becomes this traumatic event that actually causes distress and has recurring themes and dreams and all of those kinds of things. And so in 3 to 5 sessions, we decoupled that event with the nervous system reaction to it. The brain changed in a significant way, so much so that popular press around the country picked up that study, like Psychology Today and places like that, because we saw that how the brain even talks to itself changed significantly when you just neutralize one big traumatic event. It's huge. And then going in the whole other direction, because we are this network, sometimes you have a pathological process then that needs a biological intervention. And these pathological processes are inflammatory, and there's oxidative stress involved with them. And you think about something like Parkinson's disease. And so this is something that we really spend a lot of time on, thinking about how can we help patients with Parkinson's disease. And we work very closely with the Parkinson's experts at Jefferson. So most of our clinical trials, like even the cancer ones, we're doing those with an oncologist. The Parkinson's one, we're doing it with neurologists who specialize in Parkinson's disease. For that one, and we have the next phase of that trial up and running now, we wanted to make sure that we understood some mechanisms. And the big one was the role of glutathione, which is natural in the brain for Parkinson's disease. It's been hypothesized, but it's not exceedingly efficient to give glutathione itself because it doesn't pass that well through the blood-brain barrier. So the precursor to glutathione is N-acetylcysteine, or NAC. And you can buy it orally, actually, at the health food store, but in order to get the effect we're looking for, we use it as a drug, we give it intravenously. And by the way, as a drug, it has different purposes. It's so powerful. It protects the liver for people who overdose on Tylenol. Sure. And for premature infants, it's called mucormyst. And so it has these incredible effects. And so we thought, let's see if it has that same incredible effect on the nervous system. And we had a reason to believe why it might, based on preliminary data and things like that. So we did this first round of studies to show that the chemical that people are deficient of in the brain, dopamine, actually became utilized more efficiently when we gave them the N-acetylcysteine. And we had, advanced brain imaging to show that. One of the tremendous capabilities we have at the Marcus Institute, thanks to the Marcus Foundation, is we have some of the most advanced body and brain imaging equipment in the world. We have an integrated PET MRI scanner that allows us to not only look at the anatomy, but the functionality of the organ, particularly the brain that we're looking at, by combining functional MRI with positron emission tomography or PET scanning. And so that combination really gives us some insights that we wouldn't ordinarily have. That study was tremendous, and we got 2 good publications out of it. And we're now doing the next phase of it, where we're broadening the group of people. We're treating them for a longer period of time, and we're looking at advanced markers of glutathione and of disease. So that's just one example. And we're doing the same thing with MS, multiple sclerosis, and we just got an extension of funding from a different foundation, the Coors Foundation, which we're happy to be partnering with. And it is Coors, the Coors Brewery, they have their own family foundation where, they created the Coors Stadium, for example, in Denver. So they do a lot of community service, and the family likes integrative medicine. So they invited me to submit a proposal a few years ago, and I've been working with them as well.
Outstanding.
So we have everything from Home Depot to beer.
Gotta like it. Gotta like it. It's nice to see these trends, and the whole the topic of the mind-body connection, which you just so eloquently discussed in these various disease states, is truly a fascinating one, and it's really with everything that we're learning on how thoughts it can impact downstream everything from the endocrine system, lymphatic, down to the level of DNA. It's very exciting to see work like this going on. In your book, A Tapestry of Health, you talk a lot about mind-body transformation. You talk about nutrition. Then there's a very interesting chapter on something that you term sleep hygiene. And obviously sleep is something that we're seeing quite a bit, whether it's in the news or a lot of commercials, whether it's for pillows or mattresses or CPAP devices. Talk a little bit about what sleep hygiene is. And you mentioned this number of something like 50 to 70 million Americans alone. We have some type of sleep disorder nowadays, which I think I'm one of them. Why is sleep so important for not just health, but integrative health?
Yeah, it's such an important question because, first of all, that word hygiene, sleep hygiene, it's what the sleep medicine doctors love to use that term. And so, but really what it means is sleep habits. So we'll say that and it's so important to have healthy sleep habits, because if we are in a place where we can go through the 4 major stages of sleep, because we cycle through them throughout the night, and particularly allowing the body to get into that stage 3-4 deep sleep stage, it has an enormous impact on health. And many people just have a hard time. And if we're in fight or flight mode, if we're too worried, but also if our behaviors are more biological that are impairing our sleep, such as you're eating heavy meals right before you go to bed. Mm-hmm. You're not paying attention to it, but you're actually taking in caffeinated products beyond early afternoon. You're right before going to bed watching things on television that activate the brain, like a scary movie or something like that. All of these things then affect how well you'll fall asleep and stay asleep. And so we talk a lot about them in the book, but I think that what I hear a lot of during these stressful times we're in is that the boundary between home and work has gotten blurred for many people. And so they're doing things like all day and night on and off. And there's not that sort of cutoff point where, okay, now it's early evening, I'm going to have dinner, I'm going to connect with people, whether it's virtually or the people I live with, in a meaningful way. I'm going to sort of shut out the outside world now to let my nervous system calm down. And also, I'm not going to sort of bring things into the bedroom that are going to be activating my brain. So for example, we need the room to be dark. And what a lot of people are doing is bringing their laptop into bed and their smartphone, and it's going off all night and flashing light. All of those things actually can affect the pineal gland, which is trying to regulate your sleep-wake cycle. And so having the bedroom be a bit of a nighttime sanctuary for you, and if there's somebody, if you're fortunate enough to have somebody there with you as well, the two of you should do that together and think about how you do that. I think the bedroom should be tidy, a place that you look forward to going to. Make the bed, even if you're going to get in it 10 minutes later, so that it feels like something. Because sometimes that's when mine gets made. But I think it's still important to go through that, and so that it feels tidy, crisp. You can settle into it. You can relax. You can make sure that you've got no light coming in from the window, or as little as possible, and then other sources of light diminished as much as possible. And then beyond that, sometimes people still are a little bit wound up from the day. So you have lots of options. There's great mindfulness apps, or sometimes relaxing music, light a candle for 20 minutes or so. We talk about all these little tools and tricks because for most people who think they have a big sleep problem, they actually just have a sleep habit problem. And once they get into a routine of honoring that time of night, a lot of the sleep problem goes away.
Fascinating, really fascinating. Um, one other thing I wanted to ask you about. A few years ago, you wrote a chapter with some other collaborators in a book called Working Memory, The Connected Intelligence. And I just wanted to, obviously not as much therapeutic, but it's still somewhat mind-body related. Any interesting work that you're doing? I know it was back in 2013 or whatever, but interested in things in terms of improving sort of neurocognitive improvement, enhancement. So some of these themes that we get into the show in terms, let's say, transhumanism per se, but sort of increasing mental capacity, things of this nature.
Sure. And I'll, I almost hesitate to say it, except, maybe it'll be an opportunity for us to do another show together. But in less than a year from now, I'm going to have another book coming out just on brain health and
Excellent.
just on doing those things. We talk somewhat about it in Tapestry of Health, and we actually have some of those glossy pre-post photos of things that we do that activate the brain, that deactivate the brain. So what we know is that inflammation is an important process for the brain. We know that inflammation spurs cognitive decline. So having an anti-inflammatory diet and an anti-inflammatory life is something that we focus a lot on at the Marcus Institute. Beyond that, we also know from the evidence and the data that keeping the brain active in a positive, healthy way also is important. I remember, visiting, my grandmother in those long Buffalo winters, and her dining room table having these, jigsaw puzzles across the table of, thousands of pieces. And, she lived to about 90 and had all of her cognitive wits about her. And she would always say, it's because I keep my brain active. And at the time, there may not have been great data on that, but the data is pretty good on it now. So we have to keep the brain active for sure. But for those of us who are younger, the other important thing we need to do is nourish the brain so that when we're older, we have more brain reserve than we otherwise would if we weren't nourishing and nurturing the brain. And so making sure, for example, that we're taking in healthy fats and minimizing unhealthy fats. I talk about that in the book. There's a huge difference. All fats are not created equally. And there have been very good clinical trials showing that diets high, the word high, in healthy fats, omega-3 fats, omega-9 fats, things that you can even get naturally, like olive oil, healthy nuts, make a huge impact on cardiovascular health. And cardiovascular health and cognitive health have a very close relationship because, we're talking about the blood supply to the brain, really, which as an important component of our cognitive health. So all of what we talk about in Tapestry of Health, from getting enough sleep to eating well, to making sure activity level is good, to de-stressing, all affects brain health. And so we review some of those things in the next book, called Brain Weaver, and get into some more of the details. But but brain health can't be separated from, the brain is not separated from the rest of the systems of the body, and so the things that keep the other systems healthy also keep the brain healthy.
And continuing along those lines, one of the sub-themes that I focus on the show quite a bit is just the principle of what we'll call sort of healthy longevity or health span. Obviously, everything you're doing, whether it's cardiovascular or central nervous system, everything else in the system is all related to this concept. Just any interesting insights, obviously the inflammation, the inflammaging, any other interesting insights related to healthy longevity that you can talk about that's not confidential?
Yeah, there's one that people often ask us about, and I did a little pre-launch webcast with Jefferson on the book itself, and I found that for those people who had an advanced copy of the book, there were just so many questions about this one topic that I always say it's just one thing, but people are very intrigued by it, and that's circulating sex hormones as we age. And it's an interesting topic because our lifestyle affects those hormones, but sometimes those hormones are out of whack to a degree that we actually supplement them to some degree, but in a very evidence-based way, using as natural of an approach as possible. And so there's no black or white answer to this, which people often want, like, should I get hormone replacement or not? You know, it really depends upon your unique profile. So for example, I use a couple of cases in the book that either Dr. Brazan or I have had in the clinic. One of my favorite ones, because it was just so earth-shatteringly different after a few weeks, was a few years ago, a gentleman came in to see me, and nothing had changed much in his life, but he started to become fatigued and blue. His primary care physician said, sounds like you're depressed, which was a reasonable assumption. And they put him on an antidepressant, and he still wasn't better. And there also wasn't any kind of triggering event for somebody who didn't have a history of depression to just be so depressed. And so that combination made me say, well, let's look a little deeper into what's going on an endocrine level, on a metabolic level, to see if your system isn't working well in some way, and if that's, a contributing factor. So for men, for example, women will talk about that it's a little more complex of a picture, but testosterone does go down as men age, and for some people, it's a gradual decline, and it still stays healthy enough, especially if the adrenal gland is working well and other lifestyle factors are in check. But for some men, it's a precipitous drop. They feel it, it affects them, it affects their health. And of course, it's a precipitous drop too if other aspects of lifestyle aren't great. Some of his other aspects of lifestyle weren't great, but usually when it goes as low as his was, you've got to do some replacement. And so when I got his testosterone levels back, it was as if he were, a 90-year-old man. Mm. And, he was about 50 and still had a lot of life. He had his own business, making furniture, and he wanted to continue to thrive and do that. So we put him on the rest of the plan that we talk about in the Tapestry of Health, but also it was clear that he needed some supplementation. And, we started out gradual to see if the other things would help bolster that. But within a few weeks, he was a different person. He's like, I feel like myself again, because he had such a huge decline. And so it's one of those times, when we talk about hormones, where we sort of, in integrative medicine, we're using a pharmaceutical, but there's different forms of that pharmaceutical. And that's when it really makes sense to think about it in an integrative way, because using a bioidentical hormone that you do not take orally. So for example, giving somebody oral testosterone has a lot of issues that a dermal patch doesn't, or a gel. And when we get into hormone replacement for women, it's particularly the case, because sometimes women are really struggling, and a physician might say, well, here, take the birth control pill. It'll kind of get your hormones back on track, except there's a lot of synthetic estrogens and progestins in them, and you're taking it orally, and it causes a lot of problems versus doing it in a more kind of methodical, and I would say whole person, holistic kind of way, can get you better results with less side effects and less risk. And so we do talk about that in the book and get lots of questions about it. And, we talk about the thyroid as well. And we also, for a lot of people, if we think about my patient, if he would have been very overweight, I might have insisted on some weight loss before we did that, because a lot of times when people are too overweight, their fat is secreting, aromatase, which is making a conversion of the precious little testosterone they have to estrogen, can even cause some of the feminizing effects that you see. So we really look at the whole person, and it's just, hormones is something that always comes up as a question, and it's part of that overall integrative model that we think about with people once they get into those middle decades of life.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. One thing that, aside from all the work you're doing, which is extremely exciting, one of the things, I look at it, you have had this wonderful success. As you say, you have the partner in the Marcus Foundation with Bernie Marcus. You mentioned the Coors organization. Um, Too often we see stories of people with billions investing in trying to get to Mars or building their own private island or this or that. It's very refreshing to see money going towards things like this, towards health, which is such an important issue that is here and now as opposed to out there. That being said, what are some of the other sort of, as you're out there on the road looking to sort of recreate sort of this model elsewhere, are you getting more positive insight from some of these investors than you were, say, in the past? Is health, integrative health, as in the case of the Marcus Foundation, the Coors Foundation, something that you're seeing some of these deep-pocketed folks maybe wanting to shift more into than, heading off to Mars in the future?
Yes, it's a great question. There's always going to be those people that's what they want to spend all of their money on. But I think that, by and large, people want to help the world around them when they can. And what you often see is people of means having private foundations. And a lot of times you don't even know about it because they might have their niche thing that they like to support. Maybe it's a disease, maybe it's a community service, maybe it's something else. And I think that some people maybe don't do enough. I would hope that if I'm ever lucky enough to be one of them one day, that I, do a lot in terms of the good of the community, but I do see more of it. And I would say that I see more interest from people with means in health and wellness, which draws them to integrative medicine as a means of helping the health of the population, whether it be addressing food deserts in this country, which is a big barrier to health and wellness. I'm often asked to consult with organizations who have funders behind them, nonprofit organizations who have major funders behind them that want to do community good, they just don't know how to. And there's several efforts around the Philadelphia area and even nationally where I've stepped in to lend whatever help and expertise I have because I do see more of this. And I think it's the way out of the mess we're in. I think that we, in the United States, we do have, more people of means than anywhere else. And as more of those people become more conscious of the problem that we have with access to the kinds of things that will make us healthy as a nation, the better it's going to be. And I think that it's one of those things that goes across political lines. It doesn't matter if somebody's a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or whatever. We all just want to help people. And it reminds me of this project that we just got funded as well. I was so pleased that we were able to get funding from another private organization, the Avalon Fund, to help veterans with who've had a traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
And we're about to launch this program, and we got the funding just a couple of months ago to do that. And it's going to be an intensive 3-week integrative program because there's so many people who have combat-related brain issues. They had a severe concussion when they were out on the job. They're now discharged, but they still have symptoms from having had that concussion, from having had that brain injury. And so we think that we can give them an edge and give them some more resources. And so that's what this project and this grant is about. And you just see all this interest because we all have such gratitude for the people who serve us like that. And it isn't across any kind of party line. I've had Republican and Democratic leaders come forward and say, we want to help you with this project. This is something that we really, if there's a way that we can help you promote this and set this forward, that's what I love, are things, because we've become a pretty polarized nation when it comes to politics. But I think the thing that unites us is these types of efforts where we can all agree that we just want people to feel better, do better, thrive, live better. And I really appreciate the philanthropists who have led the charge, as you mentioned.
Wonderful. And as a side note, Bernie Marcus got his pharmacy degree at Rutgers University, as did I. So I just want to throw that in there. This is a tidbit that not a lot of people know. Anyway, coming back to you, obviously, as you've been practicing medicine, as you've been involved in these various initiatives, you've met a wide range of people in academia, government, and industry, no doubt. I know it's probably a long list, but at this point in the show, we come back to sort of the important mentors, influencers, partners that you might want to shout out to, mention, that have been critical along this path. Take your time with it, but anyone you want to mention that has been very important as you've been creating this new vision of healthcare.
Yeah, well, we wouldn't be, in existence without Bernie Marcus and the Marcus Foundation, and we have tremendous gratitude towards them. Early on at Jefferson, Myrna and Ira Brind were just so important. I'm the Ellen and Ron Kaplan Professor of Integrative Medicine and Chair of Integrative Medicine. Again, that was an endowed position by two people who thought, hey, there's something to this. And then in terms of mentors, there's so many, but one that really stands out is Dr. Mark Levine at the National Institutes of Health, who's the section chief of molecular nutrition at NIDDK, and he did some of the groundbreaking research back in the day on some of the nutrients that I study, such as vitamin C. And he continues to be a mentor and a guide. I think, it's probably one of the great things to sort of wrap up with a little bit is he even helped me to design the study we currently have for hospitalized patients with COVID on vitamin C infusions. So he's just a tremendous resource in that regard. At Jefferson, and this is an IRB approved clinical trial. It's on grants.gov for people who like to sort of read the details of the trial. But we're giving hospitalized patients who don't need to go to the ICU right away 3 high-dose infusions of ascorbic acid or vitamin C to trigger the immune response in a healthful way, because we believe that's what it will do, particularly activation of lymphocytes. And we're about 2/3 of the way through the study, and our goal is to demonstrate that fewer people progress and go on to needing to go to the ICU, and that we get them out of the hospital quicker. I'm hoping that's what we'll show. I can't say that's what we'll show, but I think that there's a reasonable chance that our hypothesis is correct. And again, mentors like Dr. Levine helped me to think through that study trial, just as the infectious diseases PI, Dr. Dagan Kopak, who's on the study with me.
Wonderful, and we definitely need these studies along with everything going on with vaccines.
Yes,
it's a very unique situation.
People will still get it. So if there's ways we can help them, because not everyone's going to be immunized in December. It's going to be a little time before we have this completely under control, and also to know that that's a treatment for when other things crop up. It'll help us to just get the next trial up and running quicker.
Absolutely. Really, a really fascinating portfolio of things you're up to, and it's wishing you the best with it moving forward on all fronts. For everybody that's going to be watching this episode or listening on the podcast, you've been listening to Dr. Daniel Monti, founding director and CEO of the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at Jefferson Health, also professor and founding chair of the Department of Integrative Medicine, Nutrition Sciences, Sidney Kimmel Medical College. Pick up his new book, Tapestry of Health, Weaving Wellness into Your Life through the New Science of Integrative Medicine. Pick up his other books and keep an eye out for Brainweaver, which should be hitting next year. Dr. Monti, thank you for taking the time out of your quite busy schedule to talk to us for a little while about what you're doing. Thank you for doing it.